We face climate change. We face new energy, the choices between new energy sources. We face a very different political atmosphere than we did 40 years ago. We face a very polarized atmosphere. I think that poses enormous challenges for the environmental movement, and that movement itself is changing, and I think needs to change. And that's what we're going to really be talking about here in the panel. How do we adapt environmentalism? How do we adapt the environmental movement for a new era, for new enormous challenges? And Bill McKibben, who wrote, I think you all know who Bill.
First of all, what fun to be here, and what fun to hear Dr. Commoner saluted in the beginning. When I was in college, I wrote the editorial for our college newspaper, for the Harvard Crimson, endorsing Barry Commoner for President of the United States when he ran in 1980. He didn't win. Some guy named Reagan won, but he was a great and powerful thinker. Look, I don't know about the new, I mean, you've got, for the new environmentalists, you've got three guys with receding airlines up here. And mine's been receding faster in the last couple of years as we've tried to, as Brian says, tried to also do along with writing some organizing. Truth be told, we're losing, and losing pretty badly. The melt of the Arctic this summer was one of those we've basically broken one of the 4 or 5 largest physical features on Earth. And the rest are close behind. When one reads that that the ocean is 30% more acid than it was 40 years ago, one gets a sense of the magnitude of the problem and of the challenge. The only thing I can tell you is that one of the ingredients, there are many ingredients, getting policy right, so on and so forth, that other people are more, probably in certain ways, more qualified to talk about than I am, and I'm eager to hear Ted and things. One essential ingredient is having some kind of movement big enough to push the powers that be in the direction, just in the crudest sort of sense, in the direction that we need them to go. And that movement's beginning to build. We started 350 less than 5 years ago with myself and 7 undergraduates and no money. We still have no money, but now we have operations in every country but North Korea, and we've begun to demonstrate that there is a big worldwide, and one of the ways, of course, that we've been able to do it largely with no money is because everybody I work with is 25, and they all figured out long ago how to use the tools available to us. They're not the same tools that people had in 1970. We miss a lot of the societal cohesion that allowed people and groups and networks to pull off things like the first Earth Day, but we're building as fast as we can in other ways, and we're incredibly grateful to everybody for the help with all that work.
Think350.org, obviously very young, very new way of doing things. Why did, tell us a little bit about why you and your co-founder decided to put it together. I mean, there were already no shortage of groups that were dealing with climate change, certainly, and the environmental movement is out there. So what need did you think you were addressing by creating that?
Oddly, if you think about it, though it's almost certainly the biggest problem we've ever faced, there really isn't a group in the world whose sole focus is global warming and climate change. And we wanted to try and work, I mean, when we started, it was completely ludicrous. We were like, yeah, we need to organize the world. But there are, we have 7 college undergraduates, so what do we do? Well, I mean, there are 7 continents, so that works pretty well. The guy who got stuck with the Antarctic also had to do the internet, and there we went. And a year later, we had what CNN called the most widespread day of political activity in the planet's history. Not because we're great organizers, because there's a lot of pent-up, I mean, you can't do the things that we're doing to the world at the moment and not have people notice and be scared, outraged, mad, all over the world. And that's, I'm afraid that that's appropriate. I don't think at this point the sort of worry is about declinist narratives versus optimism or whatever else. It's just, I mean, when we started, our other sort of thing was, let's just deal in absolute sheer reality. Let's take a obscure scientific data point, the amount of carbon that the scientists say you can have in the atmosphere, is our rallying cry. In part, we did that because we wanted to work globally, and Arabic materials allow you to get around the deep linguistic divides. But in part, it was because we just think, people are actually completely capable of dealing with reality in that way. In the same way, I wrote this piece this summer for Rolling Stone, and the editors were amazed that the thing went viral. It became, I think, the most shared piece they've ever had. And the editor was like, on the phone, something's weird here because we have Justin Bieber on the cover, and your piece is being liked 10 times more on Facebook. Written piece. It wasn't. I'm a good writer, so I know when I'm, this was just an effort to lay out in the bluntest possible terms the just mathematical confines that we're now in. Because in the end, the situation that we're dealing with doesn't. It's Ted's completely right. I mean, the political reality and all those things are incredibly important, but the basic problem that we're dealing with is that we're no longer in control of this situation. That the fight at this point is not between different groups of human beings, it's between human beings and physics. And that's an extremely difficult fight to win because physics is not open to negotiation. So if we're going to keep things within the sort of acceptable boundaries there, those are some of the guidelines we work with just the same way. That the sort of fact that there are 10 billion people who need to, or will be, who need to make their way on this planet is another one of the set of guidelines. And it's figuring out how to make the math work within those parameters that's so hard and so interesting. And we are going to need, we have some of the technology we need now, and we need to be deploying not what we've got and much faster than we are. We need more technology. One of the things that's going to push this process, that's going to goose this process, that's going to concentrate the minds of business people and political leaders is if there's actually a movement there demanding some action. And that movement's going to arise based on people's ability to sort of look around them and see what's happening. The percentage of Americans concerned about global warming has gone through the roof in the last 18 months. Unsurprisingly, because 85% of American counties have had a federally declared disaster in the last 18 months. But trying to figure out, how to turn that into sort of movement is hard. The good news is that there really is this, I think this kind of developing consensus on the fact that we have to do all these things at the same time, and that none of them are a substitute in a sense for the other. The movement building that we're going to be doing in the next year or two at 350 is largely focused on what we think is one of the big blockages here, which is the fact that not all of industry, but the fossil fuel industry, remains so addicted to the stream of profits from fossil fuel that it serves as an effective political block to ever getting anything done. So we're going to be trying to go quite directly after them for a while. We're doing this road show that launches the night after the election. We'll do 25 cities in 25 nights, and if you're at all interested in coming, sign up soon, because the big venues that we got turned out not to be big enough, and things are selling out fast. But we're going to be trying to really focus, because there's not an infinite amount, or even very much amount of room for change, room for continued inaction. The head of Exxon this summer said, okay, global warming's real. It's an engineering problem with engineering solutions, which in one sense is correct and a good thing to be saying. But you got the sense of how little room we have when someone said, what do you mean by engineering solutions? He said, well, if we need to move our crop production areas, then we will. That's not on the list of possible answers. If you make it too hot to grow corn in Iowa, which is what we did this summer, then the fact that Exxon has, nicely melted the tundra for us does not make it a substitute, corn belt. We begin to run into, especially when you think about 10 billion people trying to eat dinner, begin to run into very serious physical constraints. and we're crashing into them. And that's what makes this all so hard, so compelling, and the need to move so fast on so many fronts so obvious.
And clearly, anyone who works in the environmental movement knows, I think, that that single issue has generated more grassroots pressure or grassroots passion, really, than I think anything else, including climate change. And I'm wondering, why is that? And do you, I'll give a respond to Ted. I mean,
no, I just,
yeah, is it good?
I mean, there's lots of reasons that people are against fracking, most of them having to do with the immediate effects, and they're really horrible on the landscapes where people live. But the reason that in the last year or two, most of the people who are excited about it for climate reasons have changed their minds have to do with just that the numbers aren't right. I mean, everybody said, oh, it's the reason our carbon emissions are dropping, but there was a big paper out of Stanford 2 weeks ago saying, no, it accounts for about 10% of the decline that we've seen in carbon emissions. It's undercutting the move to wind much faster than it's undercutting coal, and at best it's a kind of fad diet that will put us on a permanent, slightly reduced plane of carbon emissions instead of allowing and kind of blocking the transformative breakthroughs that we need. And that's assuming that Ted's right, and it's going to be an easy matter to block up the methane leakages into the atmosphere. So if the carbon gets, I mean, the IEA modeled the whole thing. If we convert the entire planet to gas on an absolute critical timescale, what happens to the planet? What happens is 660 parts per million CO2 and a temperature increase of almost 4 degrees centigrade.
If you don't transition to something else.
Yeah, right. But that's in the process. I mean, they're modeling a system that goes faster than anybody thinks you can, even get us onto gas at the moment. Well, the point is that it's blocking. It's not.
Well, it's also enabling wind, isn't it?
No, it's not. I mean, in this country, it's clearly not.
Which
It's exactly the opposite.
You can't run a system on wind without backing it up.
That's the other thing where the sort of old dogma is giving way to the new science. In fact, there was a big study out of Britain about 10 days ago saying, just looking empirically, is this what's happening as we're seeing big increases in wind generation? Are we also seeing big increases in gas use as we're online back?
No,
and we're not. It's because we're beginning to lick these intermittency problems. Fracking the cheap gas isn't a kind of bridge to the future, which was the rhetoric people kept using, that instead it's sort of building the pier further out, this kind of rickety pier further out into the hydrocarbon lake,
They're building a movement, and both online but also out in the streets, and several times we just talked earlier today about protesters who were arrested at a protest. Why is that? Why is building that movement valuable? The board also, once you have it, what do you do with it?
Well, those are
both
excellent questions that I might just have time to answer before I've got to leave here. Look, you build movements because the other side on this fight is incredibly powerful and incredibly rich. They have all the money. Exxon made more money last year than any company in the history of money. Okay, I'm no theologian. I'm a mere Sunday school teacher, but they have more money than God. All right. So one looks for alternate currencies to try and balance some of that power somehow, and those alternate currencies are passion and spirit and creativity. They're reason and science. And, sometimes, you have to spend your body, too, But, look, for example, at what's going on with this tar sands thing. Last June, our most important climatologist, Jim Hansen, says, you know what, people might want to pay attention to this because the economically recoverable reserves from this thing make it the second largest pool of carbon in the world. It would not be a good idea to do it. If we burn all that on top of everything else we're burning, then it's game over for the climate. That's how he put it. And you can see how that's true when you look at the kind of stuff, the numbers I laid out in Rolling Stone this summer. We have, at current rate of burning carbon, we go past the 2-degree mark in 16 years of burning carbon. The last thing we need is lots more of it. But that stopped no one in government or industry. The only thing that slowed them down, and probably only temporarily, but at least for a little while, and at least made it an issue, was movement building. So when 1,253 people were willing to go get arrested, maybe it owes something to the civil rights movement. but it was the moment at which this suddenly became a national issue. You know, Brian hadn't gotten to write about it before, and then suddenly he could, you know, and so on and so forth. And we began to, and look what's happened in the time since. The Canadians have begun to search their own souls about this in a serious way. I think they've got the pipeline to the Pacific blocked going out of the tar sands. The money that's in the tar sands is a hell of a lot shakier than it was. People are reluctant to make new investments. Now, they've still got the huge advantage, and after the election, I'd say the odds are much too high that they're going to get the Keystone Pipeline built, but we've clearly slowed down some of that. And you can't just give up on this and say, well, they're going to cut down the Amazon anyway, let's just talk about the... In fact, look at what people in Brazil have managed to do. When Marina Silva, who was the Green Party candidate in the last election, ran, it was not like Ralph Nader running. She won 20% of the vote. Here's a rubber tapper from you know, the middle of the Amazon, and she won 20% of the vote. They've got a huge and building environmental movement, and it's done some remarkable things. The Amazon is in endlessly better, more intact than people thought it would be 10 or 15 years ago, and it's not for any other reason than people building powerful movements and for good scientists working through things like the Nature Conservancy. I mean, I'm on the board of the Adirondack Conservancy. I like them. And Larry ran them in Pennsylvania. You're not going to argue with us about any of that. But, you know, that kind of, it doesn't happen without people being alarmed. And if it, you know, sometimes it, you know, sort of offends people. It's like, oh, it's too much like the 60s. It's too whatever. We obviously know how to work in the 21st century. We use those tools. But the old tools, too, the tools in essence that remind us that there is a deep moral challenge here. A moral challenge as well as a technological and a practical and financial and whatever kind of challenge. In fact, it's the biggest moral challenge in that dimension that we've ever faced. The decisions we make in the next very short order determine what life is going to be like for those 10 billion people, and also for the, you know, completely conceivable 30 or 40 billion who will follow over the next millennia or two. You know, it's going to determine what life is like for the rest of creation. These are big challenges, and to just say, oh, it's, you know, don't play the sort of 60s stuff, it's too, you know, to be too grown up for that is, that's as much a mistake as assuming that that's the only thing that one needs to do.